morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Lab 207 webcast. My name is Mr. Kite, and I will be hanging out with you today as we continue on in our series about the living world. Topic for the day is going to be circulation. And before I leap on in, let me just note that this is not meant to be an in-depth study of the circulatory system. At one point in time back in the day for AP biology, you used to have to know all of the anatomy. You had to know blood flow patterns to the heart and all kinds of crazy stuff that, well, I mean, you would know for anatomy and physiology or if you're a med student, but thankfully, they have pared things back to where you just need to know an overview of the system. So that's kind of what we're going for today. Let me get your objectives and then we'll get going. So by the end of the video, here's the things that I need you to know or be able to do. First up, understand the purpose of the circulatory system. Second is to compare and contrast various types of circulatory system. And finally, discuss various cardiovascular diseases. So the first topic for the day is going to be why circulation? What is the purpose of it? If you remember back a couple of weeks ago, we talked about different animal body plans, particularly cnidaria and flatworms. Those are two organisms that live in an aquatic environment, and their bodies are thin enough such that they can get all of the nutrients in that they need through diffusion, and they can get rid of all of the waste that they need through diffusion directly with their environment. Great if you're jellyfish or flatworm, but obviously we don't live in an aqueous environment. Our cells, though, still need to be able to take in oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, get rid of other waste, take in other nutrients. So the only way that can be facilitated is through some sort of aqueous fluid that comes into contact with the cell. The answer, circulatory system. You set a series of pipes through the body carrying the fluid that has everything you need in it and that can take away the waste that you need to get rid of. So that's the whole purpose of the circulatory system, is to get stuff to the cells that they need and take away stuff that they don't need. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to talk about a couple of different types of circulatory systems. First division of circulatory systems that I want to talk to you about is an open system versus a closed system. In an open system, the blood or circulatory fluid is not contained inside of vessels 100% of the time. So here is a very crude diagram, generalized diagram. You got a pump. This would essentially be like the heart. The pump would pump fluid. Sometimes it's blood, sometimes it's a fluid called hemolymph through arteries. Remember, arteries always carry blood away from the heart. So the blood would come down the artery and then it would dump into a big chamber called the hemocoel. And in that chamber there would be organs and other parts of the animal's body that needed to be bathed in blood so that they could carry out exchange. Once that exchange has happened, next time the pump pumps, the fluid in the open chamber is pushed back into a vein and travels back to the heart. So in a situation like this, there are points in time where that blood is just free in this open chamber. For our grasshopper here, you can see all of the pipework is along the back, and then the open chamber would be down here. Now, if we were to edit this diagram to make it a closed circulatory system, all we would need to do is to take this, connect those two ends of the pipework, and suddenly we have a closed system where the blood is inside of a vessel all the time. Obviously, we have a closed system. The only time that we have got an open system is if something terrible has gone wrong and you have internal bleeding. Talking about different types of systems, there is a fairly generalized pattern of organization for closed systems, and it goes something like this. I'm just going to kind of walk you through the whole path. So, arteries. Let's start at the heart. An artery carries oxygenated blood away from the heart. So blood that has a high concentration of oxygen leaves the heart, it enters an artery. Arteries, as they travel along towards their destination, get smaller and constrict into an arteriole. Those arterioles then get even smaller and constrict into a capillary. Now, capillaries are where all of the exchange happens. I'll talk about that in a second. Those capillaries traveling away from the artery and back towards the heart, they lose a lot of their oxygen right here in the capillary bed. Those capillaries will get a little bit bigger and form a venule, and then that venule will get bigger and form a vein, and the vein carries deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So just remember that basic organization: artery, smaller arterial, smaller capillary, capillary, bigger venule, bigger veins, back to the heart. Another way to divide different types of circulatory system is a one-loop system or a two-loop system, and I've got examples of both here. A one-loop system looks something like this. You have got your heart, or the pump, right here. It pumps the fluid or the blood through some sort of respiratory organ. In this case, we're looking at something like a fish. So the deoxygenated blood is pumped out to the gills. In the gills, it gets oxygenated and it flows out to the rest of the body. This is just one loop. It kind of runs one way. You got deoxygenated and oxygenated blood mixing in the gills, and there's no separation of the two types of blood within the heart. Now, if you go over here to a four-chambered heart, this is what we run on. There are actually two loops, and you can see in the heart, the deoxygenated blood in blue is separated from the oxygenated blood, which is a really good adaptation that increases circulatory efficiency. So the way this loop basically works is you have got, we'll start down here, this would be the body. Blood coming from the body is deoxygenated, so that blood comes in from the body, it dumps into the atria. From there it goes to the ventricle, and from the ventricle it travels out to the lungs. Now this part is known as the pulmonary circuit. This is where the blood is going to get oxygenated. So it goes out, gets oxygenated in the lungs. The lungs bring it back to the other side of the heart where it dumps into an atria, again to a ventricle, and then pumps out to the rest of the body. So the beauty of this system is that it keeps all of your deoxygenated blood separate from the oxygenated blood. Very efficient. It's a good system. So this is known as a two-loop system because you've got the pulmonary loop, and then the rest of the body is known as the systemic loop. As far as blood pressure is concerned, there are a lot of different ways that blood pressure is regulated. Some of it is through the amount of fluid in the blood, some of it is through how hard the heart is pumping. Generally speaking, though, we can talk about vasodilation and vasoconstriction. So that is talking about your actual blood vessels. If they are dilated, they open up, which lowers the blood pressure because it gives more space for the blood to flow through. If they constrict, that raises blood pressure because the same amount of blood is trying to force through a smaller space. So some heart diseases can lead to constriction of the blood vessels. Obviously, if you are in a stressful situation where your body needs a lot of blood, you are going to go through vasodilation, where your vessels are going to open so blood can flow more quickly to the places where it's needed. Sometimes in a more relaxing situation, some of your blood vessels might constrict, and your body also uses this as a means of regulating, all right, are we going to push more blood to the core or towards the muscles? It's a good way to direct flow of blood. So just know blood pressure is a lot of times regulated by the size of the blood vessels. All right, the purpose of a capillary. When we're talking about circulation, the capillaries and capillary beds are really the workhorses of exchange. Throughout your body, you have got capillary beds wrapped around almost all of your cells, and capillary beds are where exchange happens. They are small enough that blood cells can generally flow through in like single file. They are the places where gas exchange happens. So if we're talking about with your cells, your cell would be dumping carbon dioxide into the capillaries, and your capillaries would be dumping oxygen into the cell. Your capillaries work off of the principles of osmosis and diffusion. So in terms of osmosis, any fluids are going to flow from an area of high water potential to low water potential. In terms of diffusion, you're going to flow from an area where you have a lot of one thing to an area where you have a little of another thing. So if you're bringing in oxygenated blood, the oxygen in that blood is going to flow from the highly concentrated state in the capillary bed into the low oxygen state of the cell that it is oxygenating. And then same for waste. If you got high concentration of carbon dioxide, that's going to flow towards the low concentration of carbon dioxide in capillary beds so they can be taken back to the blood. So capillaries, that is the workhorse of your body. It's where all of the exchange takes place. Components of your blood that you need to know about. You need to know that your blood is 55% plasma. Plasma is the fluid part of your blood. It includes ions, it includes water, it includes any of the components that are dissolved into your blood, nutrients, proteins, things like that. And then 45% cellular. The cellular components are things like red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Really, there's all of the solid components can fit into those three categories. So blood, 55% plasma, 45% cellular. Most of the nutrients that are carried in the blood dissolve into the plasma. Obviously, we know oxygen is carried by red blood cells, but beyond that, most things are just dissolved in the plasma, and then they diffuse into whatever cell needs them as the plasma flows towards that part of the body. Final slide for the day is cardiovascular disease, and there are three that I want to hit on real quick. The first one is atherosclerosis, and what this is essentially is a hardening of the arteries. So as a person consumes maybe like a fatty diet, or as they get older, the elasticity of those blood vessels starts to change to where they don't bend nearly as easily. So every time the heart pumps, obviously that sends a surge of blood down the blood vessels. As that surge of blood goes through, the vessels kind of stretch from being smaller to bigger, and you can kind of think of this as like water flowing down a hose if the hose were flexible. When that first burst of water hits the hose, it's going to swell, and then it's going to come back down, which is good because that swelling, the bending, the extension of the wall of the arteries and veins that it's flowing through allows blood pressure to stay low because the vessels are not resisting the flow of the blood. Now, atherosclerosis hardens those vessels so that when a surge of blood hits them, they can't stretch. And because they can't stretch, there's no way to release the pressure, which leads to a raising of the pressure in the circulatory system and ultimately a lot more work for the heart. And as the heart has to work harder, heart muscle thickens, which makes the heart pump less efficiently. It has to work harder. It needs more blood itself. So it's a pretty bad situation. For a heart attack, what you get is the heart has got obviously a need for blood. So while the heart is pumping blood out to the rest of the body, it's also pumping blood to itself. There's a series of arteries and veins that wrap around the heart to make sure that that heart muscle gets the blood that it needs. If one of those arteries or veins gets blocked off by, generally it's plaques, so fatty diet, high cholesterol diet can cause something called plaque to build up on the inside of arteries and veins, which restricts blood flow or can shut it off altogether. If one of those arteries or vessels gets blocked, blood can no longer get to part of the heart, which means that part of the heart tissue dies. No blood, dead heart. And finally, a stroke is a situation where blood flow to the brain is cut off, usually by a blood clot. So let's say you've got your blood vessel here that is headed to the brain. There has been some buildup of plaque inside of it such that flow is restricted. A blood clot could form somewhere else in the body, come flowing along and block off that passage right there, which would stop all blood flow going to the brain. If that blood flow to the brain gets stopped, obviously brain tissue is going to die, which is going to lead to some pretty serious neurological damage. So that is it. That is your intro to the cardiovascular system. If there were some jumpy parts in there, my apologies. My computer looked like it was acting a bit funny to me. I'll do my best to edit that out. Thanks for joining us on the Lab 207 webcast. My name is Mr. Kite, and we'll see you again.